another episode of Know Thy Health. We got a fun and special one where we're flipping the script. I'm going to be your moderator today because we're going to talk about a topic that's near and dear to my heart, something called the defined contribution model in employer-based coverage. And we actually have one of the nation's biggest experts in this space on our team, Cameron Mason, aka the Coverage Cowboy, coming to you from Texas of the North and Indiana, so he can call himself a coverage cowboy. Uh, so just to start off, I wanted to kind of introduce Cameron's background and get to why he's a healthcare expert in this space. It's a new and emerging space in the employer group market. It's kind of fast growing. It's kind of a buzz-worthy thing. If you've been in the industry, you know it as the ICHRA, which is kind of a cool name. It kind of sounds like an old Greek name, almost like Saint ICHRA, which I like. But it's new and trendy, and we got an expert, so we're going to talk about it. So first of all, Cameron, I know like everybody, when they're growing up in high school, every man thinks about, every boy thinks about, dreams about, really making an impact in the health insurance market. So I just want to start off for you to tell us your journey, how you became involved in this marketplace, and some of the things you learned along the way before we dive into what an ICRA is.
Yeah, I appreciate that. Yeah, we haven't really dove into my background much on the show, so happy to talk about it and share a little bit of my story. I certainly don't consider myself an ICHRA expert, but for the purpose of the average or for the average human, yeah, I guess I would be an expert. But there are people that know a lot more than I do. I just had the privilege of growing up in this space and learning a lot, like hands on deck, building a company. That company called Remodel Health joined. So Remodel Health was founded by two kind of individual sales, United Healthcare executives on the individual side, a guy named Scott Lingle and Justin Clements. They actually had the original idea kind of in the year 2014. So this is shortly after Obamacare was starting to get kind of traction in the individual market. But there was no framework at this point in time for what we have today when we say ICHRA. And so I joined in team on kind of the founding team as the first employee with Justin and Scott to start building Remodel Health. RemodelHealth.com is the website. If you're in any way, shape, or form familiar with the ICHRA space, you've probably heard of Remodel. They've made some acquisitions and had some big investments in the last year. So doing really well. I'm a big fan of what they're doing, and a fan of several other kind of ICHRA, ICHRA providers that are out there. I think just stopping for a second, when we say ICHRA, we mean individual coverage health reimbursement arrangement. So just make sure we plug that in there for anybody who's not really familiar with what an ICHRA is. But when I joined and we started building Remodel Health in 2015, we were there was no regulatory framework for what we have today. So we were pioneering a model um, of what we would call now defined contribution versus a defined benefit. We were helping employers shift from their traditional group health insurance plan to the individual market. And what I mean by that is, you would be an employer of, let's just say, 25 employees. You're offering United Healthcare small group plan. Your employees are getting older, they're not getting healthier, and your rates are going up 10, 12, 13% year over year. And so we would come in and we'd say, hey, your group is relatively low income, middle class to lower income. The majority of the people that work for you are eligible for quite a bit of tax credits from the federal government, but they can't leverage those tax credits because you offer them a group health plan. So we built a business around that model of canceling a group health insurance plan and shifting employees to the individual markets. And so you would introduce quite a bit of savings to an employer. That's where we started and pioneered. There were several competitors in the space at the time trying to do either something similar to us or maybe the exact same thing. By the grace of God, we survived. Most of those competitors are no longer in existence, which is unfortunate. But several companies came and went. by the grace of God, we survived and now are, if not the, or Remodel, I say we, but, just as a, you know, shareholder, just as, if not the one of the largest ICHRA service providers in the country. So that's a little bit of my background. I wore a lot of hats there. But it's pretty cool to see us kind of pioneer a market and, see it all come to life.
Yeah, so it's really cool to just get, I mean, to be able to be on kind of the ground level as to this type of shift. But maybe just start for those that are not familiar with like the defined contribution model. Can you
Mhm.
help them understand like what is the defined contribution model? Why is it so different than how you typically get employer coverage, and why does that matter? Why it's great? Why is it great for employers or for families?
Yeah, what we always say is, defined contribution versus a defined benefit. Um, to break that down in the health insurance context, most small employers offer usually one, maybe two plan options if they offer group health insurance. So if you go to an employer and they say, hey, here's our health benefits package, they probably say, hey, here's a PPO plan with a $500 deductible or a $1,000 deductible, and it's going to cost you a couple $100 a paycheck. We also offer a high deductible HSA plan that's $1 per year for you to participate in. And it's less out of your paycheck, but you have a lot more out of pocket costs. And that's usually what you have to choose from. And then they say, oh, by the way, since your wife or your husband works elsewhere, they have to be on that plan. They can't be on this plan. So they've done a lot of things to kind of control the price the employer has, right? And you have a defined benefit. You have to choose from whatever your HR manager at your company picks. Defined contribution is taking, you'll hear this analogy a lot in the ICHRA space, the shift, similar to the shift from pension plans to 401k. So back before most of our time, uh, our parents, right, like the baby boomer generation, they started seeing a shift on their retirement plans. So stepping out of the health insurance world into retirement plans, employers started saying, hey, we're no longer going to offer a pension. We're just going to offer you cash, additional, a defined contribution, and you invest it how you want. Put it in your own 401k, put it in your own IRA, however you want. You'll get a tax benefit from that. That that shift from pension to 401k plans took off like, I mean, we saw mass market shift in a period of like 4 to 5 years, like very, very quickly. So when ICHRA started coming around, everyone had this idea in their mind, like we're going to see the same shift happen from, defined benefit to defined contribution within like 4 or 5 years. It's not been the case. It's not moved as fast as I think most of the service providers. It's a little bit more complex. We could get into all of that. But anyways, really the difference between the defined benefit is your employer says, hey, here's the plan you have to choose from versus here's, let's just say a lump of cash. And you can take that cash and go buy whichever health insurance plan best fits the needs of your family. And, the value in that is everybody's healthcare needs are different. A 24-year-old single male, um, making $50,000 a year. He's just starting out. He doesn't have a family. He maybe goes to the doctor once a year. He runs 3 or 4 miles a day, very healthy. You know, his needs for health care and health insurance coverage are very different from, the 55-year-old gal who's been working at this place for 20 years, has a couple kids in high school that play sports, probably going to break bones. Her husband's got heart issues, right? They're older. And so their needs for healthcare are very different. And so if the employer is able to define the contribution uh, appropriately across employee ages and variable classes, then they can make sure that each employee has what they need to go buy coverage that's fair for them. So you're shifting with ICHRA, you're shifting from giving a one size fits all type plan to money in your pocket that you can go purchase your own health insurance.
Yeah, like I mean, it's putting like the families in the driver's seat, essentially saying like, hey, what's right for your family? What's good? What fits your situation best? So you alluded to it in terms of like there was an expectation in 2014. It's like Obamacare markets are coming out. There's a kind of new protections that they kind of instituted that kind of make this transition a little bit like smoother from like employer group coverage to shopping in the individual market. I mean, really quick, it's, like the individual market post Obamacare is guaranteed issue. So you no longer have pre-existing conditions excluded. So like if you're an employer, like if you're giving a voucher to your employees to go buy insurance, before Obamacare, you'd be like, well, I can't do that because like three of my employees are going to be denied coverage. And so there wasn't even a structure prior to Obamacare. So maybe just walk through like you mentioned the QSERA. Give give us like a little history, if you will, of like 2014 to now. How has that shifted? And for people that don't know, just so that we define a term, because you said small employers, large employers, just so that people understand what that is, like small employers being 50 employees or less, or under 50 employees, full-time employees there, larger being greater than 50, just so that people kind of can wrap their heads around when you start talking about QSERAs and everything. Give a little background of that history, where it started, where it is today and where it's going, just in terms of this evolution, even of like the terminology and the mechanisms to do this.
Yeah. I My personal view is, Obamacare, I haven't found any, hidden documents anywhere to back this up. My personal view is that, you know, Obamacare was, or the Affordable Care Act, I'll use the politically correct term. Um, and, was created to expedite our shift to socialized healthcare, right? It gave us a quick taste of it. I personally believe it was designed to fail. Maybe I'm a cynic. I don't
Hot
know.
take.
It is a hot take. I've always said this. You could ask Justin and Scott, Justin Clements and Scott Lingle at Remodel Health. I always said, hey, this system was designed to fail, uh, but it's not failing in entirety because the free market is trying to correct. The capitalistic market is trying to correct for the legislation, and any sort of legislation, you can look at it you can be frustrated by it, or you can look at it as an opportunity to take advantage of the good and bad of it, and create businesses. And that's what employers. Remodel was not alone in creating the solution to shift people from the individual, or from group market to individual market. And it wasn't just our competitors at the time. We weren't alone in this space. Employers were doing this on their own. They were like, hey, you get all these tax credits. And it was painful, right? Because there wasn't a service to kind of walk alongside each employee as they made that transition. Obamacare was enacted. You had the 21st Century Cures Act in 2016 that really established it was it was passed December 31st, 2016 to be enacted January 1, 2017. I think I have that right. I could be wrong. It was in December of 2016. So January 1, QSERAs took off. Were allowed to be in effect. So fewer than 50 full-time equivalent employees. So as Daniel alluded to, in the benefits space, you'll hear, okay, if you're less than 50, you're a small employer, if you're over 50, but it's not just 50 in terms of headcount, it's full-time equivalent. So you could have 100 employees, but if it accounts to 50 full-time equivalents, because most of them are part-time, that's where the threshold kicks in. Beginning in 2017, you could offer a qualified small employer health reimbursement arrangement. I think it's important to understand that like HRAs were not a new concept at this time. You could have previously an employer could have a medical expense reimbursement HRA. So that was pretty common, especially in larger employer groups that had the cash to do that. So they would provide a defined benefit to their employees. Their employees would choose a health plan, and let's say they have a deductible of $5,000. The employer may say, "Hey, we're also going to reimburse you, up to $2,500 a year for medical expense as an additional benefit on top of the group health plan." So that was very common. QSERA kind of gave precedence to this idea that we could reimburse premiums. So not just reimbursing the medical expense, but you can also reimburse premiums. Now, they didn't take off as quickly, I think, as some had hoped. You had to fit in a kind of a unique niche for the QSERAs to work. So you saw some small like white collar law firms, for example, take advantage of QSERA. If you had tax credit eligible employees, um, they weren't able to access those tax credits in the same way that they could if they weren't offered a QSERA. So if you offered them a QSEHRA and you gave them a contribution that was deemed affordable, you may have knocked them out of tax credit eligibility. But we saw, people like Jack Cooper at Take Command Health. They really leaned into that QSERA space and grew a really really large book of business there. So, that's what we saw pretty quickly. And 2016, that legislation started to come to life, and kind of paved the way for what we have now in the individual coverage HRA. Is that helpful? I don't know if that answers your
Yeah.
question entirely, but
Yeah, no. I think it's usually like, so I mean, I was an actuary through all this time period, like watching the healthcare markets in the ACA, working in this space. I think like you said, it didn't take off right away. If anybody can remind themselves back in that time period, it was like Obamacare, as you said. Your theory is it was designed to fail. It almost failed. It looked like it was going to fail. 2014, 2015, the first rollout of the market, you had massive, massive problems with the technology of the enrollment platform. It felt like a disaster from that end.
right.
You had really affordable premiums, actually, but it was all smoke and mirrors because it was just that they underpriced. The actuaries did a terrible job out of the gates. They underpriced, they tanked, they bankrupted a lot of the co-ops, and you had massive failures in the insurance industry. 14, 15, 16, and in 2016, 17, 18, you had a kind of a shift of the premiums. The premiums went skyrocketing. I mean, I remember we were watching like in Arizona, there was a carrier that put out 100% rate increase, just doubled the premiums year over year. And it's so funny, like what happened, there was rate increases and carriers pulling out of the market. All of the major, the Blues plans or whatever, United Healthcare, they're all like, we're out of here. We're getting out of this crazy market. We're losing our shirts. And so you had this crazy scenario of,
Uh-huh.
uh, you know, like they put all these funny things in Obamacare, like, oh, we got to keep rate increases under 10%. And if it goes above 10%, we have special review and all of that. That all went out of the window 17, 18, because it was like a carrier said, hey, if you don't accept my 100% rate increase, I'm leaving the market and there's going to be zero health plans available for your market. And it's a collapse. So just a reminder for the audience, like, you know, the concept itself came about in a period when the Obamacare market seemed like they were going to fail. So if you're an employer, like if I was an employer and I'm looking at the news, I'm like, I'm not going to send my employees to this like ridiculous market. And then 2018 happens. Trump is kind of it comes into power, and the insurers again flip out. The actuaries get it wrong a second time. They flip out. They raise the rates again, overpricing 20, 40, 30%, because he was going to tank the markets. We don't need to get into the details about why that is, but kind of like going on that narrative arc, right? So 2014 to really 2020, when we now see the marketplace stabilize. In this period is when we have what you referenced as the ICHRA, the individual coverage HRA, come into play, kind of as the market stabilize. Um, Really quick, I mean, the difference between the QSERA and the ICHRA, like what is the difference between these two things? One was for small employers, kind of in the Obama era. What is the ICHRA? What's the difference today with this ICHRA that like, what's the benefit over QSERAs, or how do they interplay? Like,
Yeah, so they removed the 50 full-time equivalent employee threshold. Large employers, you could have 3,000 employees. You could take advantage of an ICRA. They the ICRA had or the QSERA had contribution limits. So with the ICRA, I mean, you can give whatever you want in terms of a contribution limit to employees. Now, you still have to meet affordability thresholds, or it has to be deemed affordable if you're a large employer. So you're subject to the employer mandate. So if you're over 50, you've got to make sure that the amount you're offering to an employee only meets the affordability criteria. Uh, there are a few different safe harbors that employers can use to meet the criteria and meet those thresholds. We won't bore you. I won't get into all those. That's kind of nuance. Those are kind of the key differences. The other piece is that uh, the ICHRA introduced some conditions that allowed for employee classes. There's 11, I think 11 different. It may be different now, but I think 11 different classes, and then you can combine those classes in any way. So you could say that, we're going to give X amount of dollars to our 24-year-old employees in Texas, but we're going to give this amount of dollars to our 24-year employees in Indiana because the cost is cheaper, for the health plan, or whatever. So you could look at these protected classes and you can combine them in any way. So you could get pretty crazy with it, and you could also just keep it very simple. We're just going to offer all full-time employees $500 a month. The challenge you would have there, right, is that the 60-year-old employee has a lot more expensive health insurance, and it may not be affordable for him, and it's way too much money for the 22-year-old. So, you'd have to have a good, either service provider or broker that kind of understands the space to be able to help like walk your HR team through it. But it just created like a ton of flexibility to be able to set up these premium reimbursement programs. But yeah, there's some big differences there from the QSERA to the ICHRA. It just like expanded the market overnight in terms of what the QSERA literally could go and do now, right? So you could kind of focus on this niche of the market that QSERAs were a good fit for, and ICHRAs really just allowed that to uh, become an option for pretty much every employer if they wanted to entertain it.
Yeah. Which is,
But
yeah. So it's like, yeah, go ahead.
and then the one piece I don't want to like switch subjects back, but I will. The piece that you talked about was just like I guess the seasoning of the individual market for ICRA, the stabilization, right? So we had like this whole seasoning period to get the market to be stable. Uh, our company surviving through that was just a miracle in and of itself. But it was wild, I will say, to walk through that. I mean, to to be on the other end of the phone, telling a family that their Blue Cross Blue Shield plan is not going to be available next year, and we're going to have to look at you know some Medicaid plus carrier that like they never heard of, or some really really expensive United Healthcare plan because they knew they didn't pull out of the market soon enough, so they had to stay in the market, but they introduced 100% rate increases so that nobody would buy their plan. Like there were all these games that were played, right? And so having to like navigate that for people was a unique challenge. And you're right, like there was a lot of distrust or you know questioning of whether or not like the Obamacare market or the exchanges, as people would call them, like would actually work. And so ICRA was introduced at a good time where we started to finally see some stabilization in the individual market. Um, the actuaries and the health plans had actually kind of learned how to price these plans somewhat appropriately. I think there's still lessons to be learned there, but uh, we're starting to see that take shape for sure.
So what was it that Remodel did differently? Like you said, there's a lot of competitors that just like went out of, they kind of flamed out. Like even like touching on like the incentives of like how you actually convince an employer to do this. Um, like what
We
was it about Remodel's approach that like allowed you guys to like weather the storm, but then also like get ready for the trajectory of ICRA?
yeah, there's a lot to that. I would say so. I don't know if it was by intention, but by reality, we didn't raise a lot of funding, and we had this idea that this was going to be a tech solution, like we're going to be a software company. But because we didn't raise a lot of money and we didn't build a lot of tech on the front end, we had a very like human powered services approach early on. And I'd say for me, like growing up in kind of a booming, like, or growing up in my career and like Indianapolis was kind of becoming this like tech hub, tech community. I had like a ton of imposter syndrome. I was like, we're trying to pretend we're a tech company. We're not really a tech company. It like always bothered me. Looking back, I'm so glad we did what we did because we were very services focused. We were very close to the customer, and we could change course very quickly. And so that allowed us to be somewhat dynamic, or to pivot quickly when the market conditions changed, when commissions went to zero and we had to start charging a fee. So a lot of the companies were built as tech companies, and they were making their revenue off of commissions, right? We figured out how to like charge a fee for our service. If the carrier paid commissions, they paid commissions, and we took them. But it allowed us to be somewhat agnostic, like in our carrier selection process for people, like helping them navigate what plans were available. Because in that time frame, you had some carriers not paying commissions, some carriers cutting commissions. You had like this. So anybody that was built on the commission, making your revenue off commission, I think, really struggled. So there were probably just a series of like, we didn't know what we were doing choices, that played out. And then the other piece I will say that was intentional is we really focused on saving the employer money. So that really helped us build like our ICP, or like the customers that we wanted to go after. A lot of churches, nonprofits, blue collar manufacturing. We really focused on employers that one, maybe like were hurting for cash, or two, just had a workforce that was going to be eligible for tax credits where we could introduce a lot of savings to the employer. And we focused on that we were obsessed over it. And so I think that allowed us to survive some of the headwinds, and the different challenges that came. And we just learned a lot through it. And because we built services around those industries, uh, early on, it allowed us to scale that to, broader markets as we grew.
Yeah. And that's, I mean, I think people always, like you kind of said it at the beginning with like the pensions and the 401ks. I think sometimes there's this sense of like things will just magically happen, like especially in healthcare, like it's a little bit black box, like things will just magically happen. But I think what a lot of people forget about healthcare is you really have to have somebody to do it. You have to have kind of that human element and the right incentives to actually bring something into the market, which is why I find it so fascinating. I mean, you guys like weathered the storm, um, and in a sense, you set up an interesting incentive of like whoever pays you is how you're going to drive your business. So instead of getting paid by the carrier, you're getting paid by the employer, and it's like we're going to find the best option for your employees. You don't have to worry like because if you're paid by the commissions, you're going to steer them to your highest revenue point more than you are like maybe what's best for the consumer, or at least that's the incentives are going to be aligned that way. So what is it like? So, because I think there's been kind of like a false start there. Whenever I look up numbers, I don't know where the ICHRA market is. Like if you talk to anybody, like everybody will say like it's booming, it's incredible. Like, and I think there's a sense that like it has to take off. The prices are right. What do you think is like, what are the incentives or the things what holds back employers from going this route? I guess is maybe one thing to ask. Like what's the hardest thing to convince an employer to move on this piece? And then is there misalignment anywhere with the incentives in the market that like you could see like shifting it to kind of make it have that rocket trajectory that like I think most people expected and still expect. Um, and yeah, like can you add like just those two elements on the incentives piece?
There's a lot. Um, so if we go back to like like the first principle narrative that this is going to be similar to the shift from pension to 401k. If you think, I've never had a pension plan, um, you know, but I do know that most Americans like struggle to save money for retirement. Like it's not something we willingly do. Uh, Talking about the generalizing the population, but when your employer is doing it for you, like it's great. Or if there's a match, right? Like you're more inclined to participate, but like your employer is putting money into that. And so it's like not a pain point for you in the same way that like your health insurance plan is. Like you need your health insurance because you need to make sure that your bills get paid when you go to the doctor. The retirement piece is like it's important to some folks, but not important to everybody, and maybe they're not contributing on their own. And so when the pension shift happened, um, they just said, "Hey, we're not going to like put this money towards the pension account that you have to have. We're just going to put this money towards a 401k account that you just need to set that." And also, by the way, we're going to partner with Fidelity or whoever, right, to set up the 401k account. We're going to deposit the money in there. So like the change management piece was not, in my opinion, like I'm sure there was a lot of change management. I don't want to like undermine it, but I think the personal impact is a lot different. And so when you think about health insurance at the employer level, you've got an HR person who probably spends a lot of their time focused on employee benefits. You have a CFO that's very involved in the cost of that healthcare. Depending on the size of the organization, you may have other roles as well. You may have people that, you get to the enterprise level, you got people that that's all they do. It's just they manage the employee benefits for employees, and they're taking. I don't want to undermine their position, but they're taking orders on a daily basis of like changes, ads, drops, new hires, explaining businesses to the new explaining benefits to the new recruiting class. So there are, because healthcare is personal, and you hear the narrative that employee benefits is just continues to creep up as a line item on an employer's balance or on their expense sheet, right? Like it's one of the top 5 expenses depending on the employer that they pay. It's going to be for health insurance or employee benefits in general. So it's personal it's personal, I guess, to the employer, but it's also personal to the employee because it's expensive for the employee as well. And so when you think about changing your health plan, even if you're changing from one defined benefit to another, the employer has a lot of anxiety about if we increase our deductible from $500 to $1,000. I know that Susan is going to be really upset about that because her husband, he's got cancer and they're doing treatment, and so there's just this whole change management process that I think creates a lot of anxiety, not just for the employees when the change happens, but also like the staff who are overseeing the piece. So that's like one piece that I just think it creates a longer sales cycle to convince an employer to actually make this change. Even if the benefits are the same, like the structure is different, and that just freaks people out. The other piece is the broker community. Um, I love good health insurance brokers, and I said good because there's a lot that sometimes don't have the best intentions in mind for their clients, right? They're chasing a commission. It's a lot of work to change the benefits design or change the structure for an employer. And so that's the other piece too that I think, you know, we, I should have said this earlier, we really leaned into broker distribution at Remodel Health when every other competitor was trying to, I don't say every, but a lot of them were trying to cut the broker out. We tried to find ways to work with the health insurance broker or agent or consultant, whatever term they want to give themselves. But at the end of the day, they're brokering health insurance. And so we found a way to work with them. And they, if you can get to the employer and convince the employer, that's great. But typically, they're always going to go back to their health insurance broker and say, "Hey, what do you think of this thing called ICHRA?" And they're like, "Oh, don't do that. That's the individual market is scary and Obama," and they're just going to throw all these buzzwords out that just freak people out. So that's the other piece where you have the broker at play, and I think that stifled some of the some of the adoption. I'm not blaming brokers, but I think just you've got like multiple layers of one convincing that this is a good solution and then change management along the way, which just makes it difficult for sure.
Yeah, you got a little thought bubble there. That was like
Yeah, I was moving my
thumbs up
hand.
to camera for
Why?
thumbs up. You had to, yeah, the good brokers wanted to give you a thumbs up on that one.
The good
Your
brokers, yeah.
technology. Yeah,
But
I
that, I
think
think
this
you
is.
touched
Go
on a
ahead, Bob.
point. You sort of insinuated a point that you didn't explicitly acknowledge too, which I think is important to acknowledge, which is like just adoption rates. Like you look at to as an employer, you want to look to your left and the right at your peers and your competitors really and say, what are they offering?
Mhm.
And am I going to be the first one to put my neck out here and try something different and innovative? What if it backfires on me? I know when I've talked to small employers about this as an option for their staff and benefits, their first reaction, and this even goes to maybe another point of why this hasn't been more widely adopted. Their first reaction is, well, that seems like a lot of homework that I'm putting my that I should be doing as an employer, and I'm kind of like putting that responsibility onto my employees to go shop the individual marketplace without sort of a roadmap or guide or helping them limit options, which is it's kind of a weird concept as Americans. Like our culture is built on options and freedom, and we want to give people options. But in this one peculiar industry or marketplace, it's normalized, and we've been sort of conditioned to think that that's really the employer's place. The HR, we have HR departments to help limit options and give our families and employees, 2 to 3 insurance options to choose from. And in a sense, that can be helpful, but in another sense, you think, well, why would you have some stranger that's managing a block of completely disparate families with disparate needs and choosing funneling them into random options that they think is best for their families, as opposed to just like, what the way the ICHRA is really set up is like just give these families a voucher to go purchase on the free market.
Yeah, for sure. And it's it's there's a piece of like control that the HR team, and these are all like I've worked with so many of these people. They're great people, and they really care for their employees. But there's like they know their defined benefit. They know the group health plan. Like they select it for their people and for their CFO to make sure it met you know, the budgetary, needs of the CFO. But they selected this plan and they can explain it. And you're like, Bob, Daniel, welcome to ABC Company. Let me tell you about our benefits. Here are the two options you can choose from. And then when you shift to something, a service like Remodel Health or ICHRA, you're like, hey, here's what we're doing. We're going to give you money. But I don't know exactly how much money because we have this really complex strategy and I don't know what zip code you live in. And I'd have to go look that up. But let me go, and it's like all of a sudden your employees are like, what kind of like magic are they doing with health, like what health insurance, and then they're like, okay. And then, Bob, because you live in, you know, this county, you've got 42 plans to choose from. And Daniel, because you live in the other county, you've got 63 plans to choose from. Like, this is great. You have the power of choice. And then you guys are like, uh, can you just tell me like what I get? Cause I don't know how to like look at health insurance plans. And I think at Remodel, at least, we sat across the table from people, like literally in the same room and enrolled them in benefits. And we helped them figure out based on their personal needs, like but between the 63 plan options, like what made sense for them. And if we would have tried to do this all through tech early on and just had like, oh, just log into this portal and pick one of your 63 plans, it would have never worked, right? It's like, it's really frustrating for people because they just don't understand it. And so, and they don't want to. They want someone that understands it and gets it and can take the information from their situation and help them find a plan. Yeah, there's a there's a big challenge there, and it's getting better. Like a lot of the services that focus on ICHRA, I mean, they're creating these really good, both tech enabled, like hand holding experiences to walk people through it. It's becoming a big market, so it's exciting to see where it goes. And I think we need good regulation to kind of help. some good regulation and, some rule changes and, some things. And I'd be curious your guys' thoughts on this, but there's some levers we could pull either from a regulatory perspective, mostly from a regulatory perspective, that I think could really help, the market move in a big way. And, everybody has an opinion on this matter, but curious from a actuary and an attorney perspective, like what you guys see as you've paid attention to ICHRA over the years.
Yeah. And one thing before jumping on that, I think it's just like, I find it so fascinating. I love hearing the remodel story because there's this like, I think there's always been this like this desire to make everything be like tech, everything be super like even we know we've got the pleasure to know Dan Pete, who was like one of the like early innovators, one of the early companies, Hixme, in this space. And like he told us the concept that they came up with is like you put in your information and then like three options pop up, and it's like the technology is meant to like curate like what's best, right? And so you think that there's got to be a way to like make it super efficient where the HR person can be like, I don't really know, but we got this great platform that you just like put in your information and it'll drive you to the right thing. But then there is that background of like, well, if they're making their money off of the commissions, like, can you fully trust that technology to really guide you to the right thing? Does do you just trust it in general? Like, can like without actually having that human experience, like it's so personal healthcare that like, can you actually just like outsource that to tech? Um, and I really think like trust, I think people forget that like trust is very, very valuable. When you talk about a high dollar expense, something that's really important to you, trust becomes like more and more and more valuable. It's why like you still have the real estate agent market where like if I'm dropping 500,000 or if I'm in San Diego and I'm dropping 2 million, whatever is crazy amounts going on here, like you want someone that's actually going to go in the house with you, like who
Mhm.
is an expert, has seen the iterations of houses of where it can go bad and like walk you through that process as opposed to like I don't know, whatever it was like, what was it like Rocket Mortgage or whatever they're trying to do. Like, so there's, I think just like that's such a cool aspect of like this market is going to always have like a human touch to it. And I think that's, seeing you guys like survive because of that is a testament to that like, Obamacare was created to like get the agent out of it. Obamacare was created to put the commissions to zero because they wanted the tech exchange solution. And that was one of the biggest failures of
Yeah, I mean, it there's a lot of views on, you know, whether it was the motivations of Obamacare, their view towards the broker. Um, the health insurance broker has proven, you know, to be needed. Now, everyone's opinion of why that is might be different. I mean, there are companies out there actively campaigning on the fact that like with AI and all these, new advances of technology, the broker should not exist. And there's people doing that in the real estate space too, right? Go to Redfin and, click on, but guess what happened? Even Redfin has Redfin agents now. They used to not, but now they do because people want to know whether the broker has the right intentions or not. I mean, I guess that's up for the broker, up for the person to choose the right broker, right? Um, people want they kind of just want to be told what to do, unfortunately, or they want help through it. And so, there's a lot here that people don't understand when it comes to health insurance plans. And so it's an interesting piece where, I think for us now, I can't speak to everything Remodel's doing from an implementation. We should probably have one of them on the podcast to talk about what they're doing today. Just for listeners, like I've been an arm's reach away for about 3 years, so I'm not like close to what they're doing the day to day. But early on, I mean, we partnered with brokers, and we made our money off a fee, a platform fee charged to the employer for our services, for our ongoing services. Um, but we allowed the broker to enroll their clients if they wanted to. Like we didn't care. We were going to show
That's
their employees the same exact plans that they had access to on the market. We were going to show them alternative plans. They didn't get tax credits, depending on what year we were in and what legislation changed, if short-term medical was a good option. We helped bring healthcare sharing kind of to the employer market, MediShare specifically. And so we did a lot of, creative things to try to, help people find the option that was best for them. And we would include the broker early on. Now, I can't speak. I don't know how. I don't know that the broker is that included at the actual individual enrollment level today. I think we just learned along the way. It was like so complex that most group brokers don't understand the individual markets, but they're the ones that hold the key. So they want to bring in an ICHRA solution, but they don't want to do the individual enrollments. They just want to continue to help manage it strategically, but not tactically. So, Remodel's got a great implementation process, but, we would fly people out to wherever these, companies were. And it probably cost a lot of money for us to do it, but we learned a ton along the way. And so, yeah,
and you got rid of the barriers. Like you got rid of the barrier with the if the employer, if it's like you get past the CFO, you get past the HR, and then the broker stands in the way, it's like, yeah, we'll play ball with you. Like, I think that's super smart.
I mean, generally health insurance or health care, right, just has to become easier for the average person to understand, for a chatbot to be able to help enroll people at scale. And so, I mean, we've talked about that here at Presidio. Like we have a self-enrollment flow. We're going to have a way for people to enroll on their own, but we're also going to have a very clear way for you to call in and talk to a human, because, it's so complex. It's not just the plans and the plan designs that are complex to the person. It's how does that health plan interact with, um, the local hospital system, with their drugs that they have to take. Like there's all these questions that are just, really, really tough. I recently helped some close friends of ours, figure out, the wife is going to start staying home with the kids, and they need to find an individual health plan. And they're asking me all these questions. And I know this space better than most. And I don't mean to say that arrogantly, but like I could not for the life of me figure out if her one of their prescription drugs was going to be covered. And um, I finally called the carrier, got a hold of the right person, and they were like, yeah, we think it is, you know, and we're pretty sure, and you're just like, that's what people are left with. So how does
Yeah.
an AI agent like make that comfortable for someone? I don't know, but there's a lot we need to lean into with technology, I think, in this space, and there's some companies doing a great job at it. But people just want that trusted person to walk them through it.
Yeah. And going back to your bridge question of like, where do you see like regulations? Because I think what you guys did was like you see the future, but like, what's the present? The present is brokers are in charge. There's a bridge to get to the future. Like, don't just
Mhm.
be like crazy and think like, oh, I'm just going to create a totally technological platform and somehow get there and bypass like the structure that currently exists, right? And so I think there's a similar analogy for like the marketplace, because one thing we haven't talked about is one of the big cons of the defined contribution model as it exists today is the actual plan options in the market today. So
Uh-huh.
we'll use like Texas as an advantage. So like as an example, Texas has zero PPO plans. They have a bunch of Medicaid players, a lot of like people that so like carriers that were involved in Medicaid, the Centenes of the world, the Molinas of the world, like they had a huge footprint in the individual market, so that
Care
when
source in the
you
Midwest. Yeah.
care source, like when you LA Care out here. So when you switch from employer-based coverage, employers usually have very broad networks. You see any doctor you want, and then you flip to the individual market. You're talking narrow networks. You may not be able to see your doctor, and that causes kind of like one of the friction points in today's marketplace. And so one thing, from my lens of like working in the individual market on the actuarial side, is understanding that the ACA, Obamacare, up until today, has served as like a Medicaid expansion like market for very, very low income people today. And so all of the incentives were aligned to cater to people that are very price sensitive, that are used to Medicaid networks, that are making, 10, 15, 20, $30,000 a year as a family. And so the market itself, 20 to 25 million people are in it. The vast majority of those are what I just characterized. And the insurance carriers have created products to serve those people. And without getting into like, this is like a very complicated actuarial topic, but there on the back end of Obamacare is something called risk adjustment. And risk adjustment is like if I get a healthy member as an insurance carrier and you get an unhealthy member, well, me as the person that got the healthy guy has to write the check to the unhealthy carrier on the back end, so that like the idea is that like from the insurance carrier side, like whoever enrolls, you're kind of agnostic or indifferent to who enrolls. But of course, the formula involved in that is created by humans, meaning there's always going to be an imbalance. And there's an unfortunate reality that CMS has yet to address. They know it exists. They've known it for like 8, 9 years now. I've talked to the people. I know they know, like that they overcompensate the really, really under, like the really, really low income folks by like almost 30%, like something crazy, right? And that population is like 30% of the population. What that means is that on the back end, all of the dollars flow to the low income people. And so the carriers, like you have winners and losers of someone enrolls, you make a profit on them, you make a loss. All of the winners for them are these really low income people. All of the losses are the non low income people, meaning that like the low income people will take a narrow network HMO. The higher income people want a PPO. I'm going to offer a low income HMO. This is just the reality of the Obamacare markets as it stands today. I say that to say that like what needs to happen is just at the federal level and in the mind of the carriers. So some of the incentives need to change to where if this is the future of like employers shifting their employees into the individual market, that the carriers are incentivized to offer, PPO plans. Like if you're a Blue Cross plan and you have no difference between your employer plan and your individual market plan, like the only reason that that doesn't exist is the incentives aren't there for them to do that yet. So this is something I've actively talked to the federal government. They don't even need to like, this is something they can do without any executive order, without anything. They just have to fix the risk adjustment formula. And then I think carriers will start to like to participate more in this space and add options. And if the market starts growing, like contextually, there's 150 million Americans on employer-based coverage, and there's 20 to 25 in the individual market. So, like, you could take 10% of the employer market and add 15 million people to the individual market and radically shift the type of people that the individual carriers are serving. So the players involved need to just understand that like don't think of this as a static environment. Like it's just going to stay. There's always going to be HMOs. There's always going to be, that's not the case. Like very little shifts could totally make the individual market look like the employer market if you get the incentives right. So I think it's not, that's like, that you can do without rules. I think the second thing that I've heard, and I'd be interested to hear your take on this, Cameron, of like if you just allowed for you to offer an employer plan alongside an ICHRA. So right now you can't. You have to like choose one or the other. So this goes to like your HR person, like oh my gosh, I got to move 1,000 people over to this complicated system. But if you allowed the employers to just say you can offer both and let your employees choose to either go the employer plan versus ICHRA, that is one thing that like an ICHRA 2.0 rule could do to like shift, kind of like taking it from the stance of why employers might do it, shift their incentives to kind of move in that direction. That's what I would. That's the area that I would go to. But I'm curious if you see that or what you think could help kind of move the needle?
I think those are two. Well, at least the first one for sure is like a meta narrative for what I always say is like a way to create product parity. So yeah, I've said this to you guys a lot, but when I think about going back to the pension to 401k idea, your pension might have been invested in like emerging market stocks and um, you know, some other tech stocks, and then some kind of moderate growth, stocks as well, right? So you were able to log into your pension account, or your employer set this pension account up based on some growth profile of how they wanted, those your pension to grow over time from an investment perspective. And then they said, hey, Daniel, Bob, we're doing a 401k. We're going to give you the money instead. And you log into your Fidelity account that we've set up for you and just pick between, do you want, about a 5% target growth per year, the 7% or a really aggressive 10% growth per year. And based on when you're going to retire, you might look at that differently. The benefit to you was, one, you got the choice of how to invest it, but you could also invest it in the same exact product, the stock market that your pension was invested in previously. With the individual insurance market, to your points that you were making around the PPO and the networks, like you're not leaving your Blue Cross Blue Shield group plan and investing it and getting to go choose the same exact plan in the individual market. So it's gotten better, but we have a lack of product parity. And so that means that sometimes employers have to contribute more. Um, they have to contribute more on like kind of a pro rata basis to make sure that employees are able to afford the coverage, right? So what I mean by that is you're on a $2,500 deductible plan on your defined benefit, but there is no $2,500 deductible plan that's got a similar network or in your area. And so maybe you have to kind of align your defined contribution to a $3,000 deductible plan. So you're going to give them a little bit more that they could buy down, right? And so like there's all this strategic approach that comes into play. And then at the end of the day, they can only go to hospitals in a very defined network. They can't go out of state. And so there's a lack of product parity between the group market and the individual market. We've seen that chasm is, it's gotten better over time. But that's like one of the bigger things. So like, I don't know the exact changes that have to happen. I have some ideas, but like I think that's a good one, right? Like the one that you mentioned on the oh geez, the
Splitting
yeah, the
splitting
split.
the
So
employer, yeah, the employer to
that's a good one. And then the other piece that I always uh, come back to is, or the other piece that's like to what you mentioned that I like to come back to is the carriers like are now are are starting to pay attention to this. The ones that are ahead are Centene, which owns Ambetter, or their brand in the individual market in most states is Ambetter. They're paying attention to this in a big way. Some of the smaller kind of Blue Cross, like Capital Blue in Pennsylvania, they're paying attention to it. Oscar's paying attention to the ICHRA market. And I know the BUCAs, right? Your Blue Cross Blue Shields, your Aetnas, Cignas, like they're united. They're paying attention to it. Um, I think we're still waiting to see what kind of investment, these companies make in the space. And what I mean by that is like re-entering these markets in a big way. We always said at Remodel Health, any conversations we ever in partnerships we tried to build with carriers was like, look, we're returning good risk to the individual market. We weren't doing it in a big enough way at that point in time, I think, to satisfy the carriers. But I think they're starting to see that with ICHRA, you have working class, much healthier people entering the individual market. And so it can make sense for many of these carriers to re-enter, and some of them have. But I'd like to see them come back into the market in like a big way. And I think most of that is just creating product parity between the individual plans and the employer plans. And I guess to piggyback on some of the ideas you have, Daniel, just expanding the flexibility of ICHRA. Maybe there's some options for, from a regulatory perspective, there's maybe some ways to interact ICHRA contributions with subsidies. Maybe not in like a huge way, but whether it be subsidies or cost sharing. Also expand what ICHRAs can cover. Things like COBRA, things like short-term medical or off exchange plans, even if they meet certain criteria. So there are some things that can be done to, I think, make them even more flexible and more advantageous. Because if I'm the HR person and you guys came in, if we were to reenact our skit from a little bit ago, and I said, hey, it's $200 a month for the PPO plan out of your paycheck, it's $1 a year for the HSA plan out of your paycheck, or I'm just going to give you $500 a month and you can go pick whatever plan you want. You now have like a decision to make, but the HR person doesn't feel like as out of control, if that makes sense. So I like the idea of being able to offer the group and the ICHRA side by side, just to be able to give the employers more options for their people. I think there's value in that as well.
It's no risk to the employer too, right? It's like, hey, let's offer what we already offer plus an additional benefit. Why not do that? Who wouldn't opt for that, right?
Right, right.
Do you
The
guys think, sorry, go ahead.
with that, I mean, the employers, I mean, they pay for the health insurance because they kind of feel like they have to. They they, they don't want to.
Well, they do. Well, they legally do.
Well, they
If you're
legally
over
have
50.
to. Yes. If
Yeah.
you're well, you can just pay the penalty. But
Which is what, 2000?
Yeah, it's not, doesn't always math out, but you could pay the penalties. Or sorry, they're not. We always tried to avoid penalty. Shared responsibility payment. You could just pay that, but yes, they legally have to, but they don't. Traditionally, they don't want to. They just, the cost of health insurance has skyrocketed so much that the big companies started doing it to attract and retain talent. Smaller companies kind of had to follow suit. Now we're in this situation where employers are like, hey, we don't pay your homeowners insurance, your auto insurance, your, typically we don't pay your life insurance, so like, why should we pay your health insurance? So, employers, I am in theory, like, I think they like the idea of ICHRA. It's just in practice, what does it do for the morale of your people? And so if you can offer them side by side, it makes it easier to kind of move to that model over time. Because I think you can see how that plays out, right? If you design the contributions appropriately to the different plans to give an incentive to go pick your own plan, 3 years down the road, do you say, hey guys, we're just going all in on this ICHRA model because 70% of you are on it anyway, and get them out of the benefit business. But sorry,
Yeah,
Bob.
It's kind of weird that employers have got there in the first place, right? And I think that's something to like just kind of we might need a little bit of, like, as Americans, we need a little bit of jarring to help us realize, wait, why are employers in the benefits business in the first place picking our health insurance plans, right? And there's some historical context for that, coming out of World War II. We don't have to get into, but I think it's an important, just to like remind ourselves, like, why wouldn't we choose why would we limit ourselves from the full menu of available options for our family when we choose our health insurance benefits? So from that perspective, it seems like ICHRA is a great option. It gets employers out of the middle. It frees up Americans to have the autonomy to choose an insurance plan that's best for their family, right? If we can get the economic incentives, the tax benefits, the regulations aligned, it sounds like market adoption could be on the horizon here. I'm curious to hear your guys' perspective on, like, timeline for expected market adoption, if you think this is going to take off. And if that does happen, does this have a broader impact on costs of American healthcare or other impacts?
You
Yeah,
take that, Daniel.
I'll take it. I'll take it first. I think as it stands today, the individual market premiums dropped below your average employer market premiums, like for the first time in these last couple of years. I think market adoption, even if you didn't do anything, will be pretty strong in the next like 5 years, that you could see, a 10 million, a 15 million type of movement in the next 5 years. I could see something like that. I
And what
think
you're
if
just to
they,
pause and zoom in on what you just highlighted, because I think it's a big statistic, right? So you're saying I assume it's comparable uh, employer sponsored coverage versus comparable individual market coverage. It's cheaper to go to the individual market. So the employer and the employee can both save money for offering virtually the same benefit if they put the employee on an individual market plan.
yes. Now it's not parity to Cameron's point. Like
Right.
if you take the lowest gold plan compared to the employer plan and you kind of normalize it out, like it is cheaper, but it's usually your Centenes, Molinas, those type of folks. So it's not total parity, but there is that savings opportunity. So I think that is a huge unlock in the market. And usually healthcare takes like 3 years to react to anything. So like I think this is going to like pick up steam in the next couple of years, no matter what. The administration is very, very ICHRA friendly. Um, so if they come out with a ICHRA 2.0 rule that just nudges the market, or if they change risk adjustment, which again, like it's kind of the dark horse in all this that people don't know in the background. If they just change that, um, I think you could have like double that type of market growth, just from kind of like having that unlock. So I think it takes a few more things to get into that kind of like pension to 401k moment. But what's beautiful is you have the free market there that's trying to figure it out. And the government just needs to like take a couple of steps. But the free market wants to do this because, like you said, Bob, it's a no-brainer. Like the employers want to get out, the employees don't. Doesn't make sense to the employees. Even Bernie Sanders was railing on this for a while, like, your employer chooses your health, and what, like it's like, his pitch was for Medicare for all. Like instead of your employer, it should be your government, you know. But like it's almost like unanimous. Everyone thinks it's a dumb model that we have from World
Did
War
we
II.
lose him?
So I think I don't know.
I
I think it's
can't hear
prime.
Daniel anymore. Yeah.
Coming back. You must have bad connection. Yeah, there's man, we lost him in a Bernie Sanders reenactment. See if he,
A
we
pretty
should we
bad
should
one. Am I back?
Yeah, you're
yeah,
back.
you're
Yeah.
back.
No, I was just gonna say it's a great brand. We should steer more conversations to invite Bernie Sanders impersonations from Daniel.
Well, unfortunately or unfortunately, I mean, regardless of the political aisle you sit on, like the good or the damage, like has been done. Obamacare is here. Uh, Affordable Care Act is here. The the consequences of that have happened, and I think what's it's just it's this like political volleyball, and I think the challenge too, like the risk adjustment thing, Daniel, like it's really hard to spin that in a way that like consumers understand and makes them want to vote for the same administration that enacted it. So like it's easy to be like, hey, we're giving more tax credits, like people like that, you can win more votes that way. So it'll be interesting to see. Like, we're going to have some version probably of an ICHRA 2.0 or 1.5 or whatever you want to call it, and it'll be interesting to see how like they can do a lot that no consumer would ever understand, but will actually impact a lot of consumers' pocketbooks. Um, but they could also do some things that consumers could get excited about in the process. And and I think until we have working class people asking their employers to implement an ICHRA, like currently you have people going to their employer like, can we have an HSA plan? Like I never use my health insurance and I'd love to like save the money. Oh, that's another thing. ICHRA should be able to pair with an HSA. I think it's stupid they don't. But like if you want employers to adopt it, employers love giving money to HSAs and the employees like it too. But you have employees, most employers offer an HSA plan. Most of them do it now because they've been forced into a high deductible health plan. So it's like it just comes with it. But you go to your employer and you say, hey, like we'd love it if you also offered like an FSA. because I have childcare needs and I could like contribute, you could help me contribute to a dependent care account, whatever, right? So until we have people coming back and saying like, I wish you offered an ICHRA because the marketplace has this plan that I really, really want to be on, but I can't be on it because you offer a defined benefit. Like that is when the tides will change. And so until we create enough momentum in the individual market that people want to be on those plans and they don't look at them as like some garbage exchange plan or whatever term they want to call it. Those are the things that I kind of see like, really, really making a dent in the market and not just moving 10 or 15 million, moving like, 20, 30, 40 million Americans to the individual marketplace through ICHRA is when people want to are begging their HR department, to implement it.
We need like a Fat Joe Busta Rhymes campaign for ICRAs to power to the people. I don't know if you saw that. They had like some had some like hip hop like big time rappers get involved in like I think it was like price transparency or something. So if we got Jay-Z, if we got some of the big dogs
Yeah.
come out and like start
We'll
promoting
get
ICHRA, I think.
Yeah, we'll get Fat Joe to partner with one of the semaglutide or GLP-1 pharmaceutical companies to include it for free with the individual health plan. I think that's the play. Like if you can include these like magic pill drugs with the health plan on the individual market, we could probably get a lot of people to want to move over.
Yeah, Fat Joe becomes Skinny Joe through ICHRA, dude. And it's like,
Yeah, we got to play here. I'll reach
man.
out to
All right,
his
well,
agent.
we'll work on that, folks. We're here for you guys. This is I'm gonna close out our conversation here. We've gone a little over an hour. And just say that one of the reasons why we love this conversation and topic because like we believe here that like that is the future, that, there's going to be more families choosing their own health insurance. We think it's vital that if they are going to choose their own health insurance, that there are Christian pro-life options in the marketplace. So we're leaning in 100% into this market space and saying we're going to build the America's first Christian health insurance company so that like this thing explodes, when people are having to shop there, one of the pitches that they can make as an employer is to like, hey, like for all of our Christian employees, like this allows you to actually go out and buy a Christian plan. Whereas like as an employer, I can't do it. We got too diverse of a employee base. I can't do it, but you can do it. That's actually, I think, one of the kind of fun aspects of where this is going to go and why we love it. So Cameron, thanks for just giving us all your knowledge. Thanks for sharing your background and Remodel, and for everyone watching, thanks for listening. Send us your comments or any thoughts on some of our proposals for the future, and hopefully 5 years from now we do a recap show of like we actually made it, and we invite Skinny Joe on here, and we have a
Skinny
fun time.
Joe. Yeah. Yeah. Thanks for highlighting the family first plan we're trying to build. Because on that note, my daughter's waking up, so this is good time for me to jump off anyway. I gotta go get her out of her bed.
Go for it, kid. All right, signing off.